Your guest with us today. We are studying our way through the gospel according to Luke, and we're looking to see, what did Jesus do? What did he say? And then what is required of us? What does he expect of us as his followers? Now, last week we saw the story of Jesus calling Levi. We know him better as Matthew, but he called Levi to give up his life as a tax collector and follow him. Levi did that. He gave up everything, and he was so excited about following Jesus that he gave this huge banquet and made Jesus the center of the attention. He invited all of his other friends, tax collectors, to come and to get to know Jesus. But if you remember the story, the religious leaders, they weren't very excited about this. That Jesus would associate himself with sinners was actually repulsive to them. But Jesus explained to them and said that it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but it's the sick. But this carried no weight with the critics. They didn't see that it also applied to them. In their mind, they just absolutely could not fathom that Jesus and his disciples would participate in this type of banquet. And this is not just a one-time event. They've been watching Jesus for some time. And one of the things that they have noticed is that Jesus wasn't very religious. Jesus and his disciples did not fast like the good religious people did. So the Pharisees regrouped after this encounter with Jesus, and they recruited some help. And then we're going to pick up the story in chapter 5, verse 33. Luke wrote, "Then they said to Jesus, 'John's disciples fast often and say prayers, and those of the Pharisees do the same, but yours eat and drink.'" Now, the they in this context right here is defined in Matthew. When he's writing his gospel, he defines it, and it reads like this: "Then John's disciples came to Jesus saying, 'Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?'" Now, one of the questions we may ask, we may begin with this, is like, now wait a minute. I thought John the Baptist was on Jesus' side. Why is his disciples coming and attacking him? Why are they placing this kind of accusation toward Jesus? Now, to kind of help us understand this, we've got to remember who John the Baptist was. He himself lived a very barren lifestyle. He lived out in the desert. The Bible tells us that he wore just, camel hides. He ate locusts and honey and stuff like that. And he was very to himself in that perspective. He also, his message, if we remember back several chapters, his message was one of repentance, one of mourning of my sinful nature. See, John came as the ultimate, the final prophet of the old covenant. He came to prepare the way for the new covenant. So his lifestyle, the way that he thought, the way that he acted, was very much in line with Old Testament covenant theology. And so his disciples, they did the exact same thing. This was their leader. What they were seeing at Levi's house, what they had seen of Jesus and his followers, just did not compute. It didn't mesh with the way they were understanding, the way they had been taught. Now, I want us to pause just for a second and make sure we're on the same page, because the issue that we've got here is fasting, but that's not really the issue. But let's talk about this just for a second. The definition of fasting, a very simple and traditional one, is this. Fasting means to abstain from all or some kinds of food or drink, especially as a religious observance. This is the basic definition. Now, a more modern definition, which I'm not going to put on the screen, I'm just going to talk about, is that we have made it to say anything that is important to us that we give up. So a lot of people nowadays, they may not do a food fast, but they do what is called a social media fast or a technology fast, and where they give up getting online, watching TV, being on their phone, all those kind of things. I want us to understand something, though. When we get back to, and we can apply this to a media fast, but in a physical fast, I want us to clarify there is a difference between dieting and fasting that I think sometimes we confuse. See, dieting in and of itself is physical. I diet so that I can lose weight. I diet so that maybe my health will be better. It's a physical thing. Fasting is spiritual. I fast so that I can be closer to God. If I just skip a meal, I am not fasting. If I spend time praying during lunch instead of eating with the purpose that I'm being drawn closer to God, now we can call that fasting. If I turn off the TV and I go cut my grass, I'm not doing a media fast. I'm not doing a technology fast. I'm just exchanging one thing for another. But if I turn the TV off, if I put the phone down, if I dedicate a specific time in which I'm going to read God's Word, I'm going to pray, I'm going to listen to Him, now we might can call that a media fast. But whatever it is, what we've got to understand is that the idea of a fast or fasting is not just something I do. It's something I do so I can be drawn closer to God. I spend that time in whatever it is that I would have enjoyed doing, and I dedicate it to God so that I can be drawn closer to Him and He can be drawn closer to me. Now, fasting was one of those Old Testament practices that became a very integral part of their religion. Here's something interesting, though. It was only commanded one time. And all the times we hear about fasting in the Bibles, it was only commanded one time, and that was in connection with the Day of Atonement. The high priest was supposed to fast in preparation for the Day of Atonement. But it became a very widespread practice. And in many situations, it was quite proper. The prophet Joel called Israel to a repentant fast when he said, "Dress in sackcloth and lament, you priests. Wail, you ministers of the altar. Come and spend the night in sackcloth, you ministers of my God, because grain and drink offerings are withheld from the house of your God. Announce a sacred fast. Proclaim a solemn assembly. Gather the elders and all the residents of the land at the house of the Lord your God and cry out to the Lord." There's a purpose here of bringing the people to God. It was appropriate. But along with the appropriate uses also came abuses. Many people began to think that fasting was a way to achieve holiness. In other words, it was something now that I'm doing that's going to get God's attention. Oh, hey, hey, angels, come gather around. Do you notice Joe didn't eat lunch today? Big deal, right? In fact, Jesus warned through the prophet Jeremiah. He said, if they fast, I will not hear their cry of despair. If they offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Rather, I will finish them off by sword, famine, and plague. Didn't sound like the fast was going to do any good here, because they were doing it for the wrong reason. Now, as we have seen with so many good things that were done in the Old Testament, by the time they got to Jesus' time, the religious leaders had blown them out of proportion. And they had done the exact same thing with fasting. The Pharisees had declared and decreed that good, holy people fasted 2 days a week, Mondays and Thursdays. And what happened because of this, that the overall effect is that people began to believe that true religion was solemn, joyless, and gloomy. The Pharisees dove right into this. When they would fast, they would take on the appearance of looking as pitiful as possible. They wouldn't bathe. They would actually take like a chalk and they would rub it on their face to give this sense of even being sick. They wore the worst raggy clothes that they had. And the problem is they're doing all this so that they would get noticed. As they were walking down the street, people would know they are fasting because of the way they looked. What happened was this raised the idea that you couldn't be spiritual unless you were uncomfortable. Spirituality, they thought, consisted of doing things that you don't want to do and not doing the things that you want to do. And if we're really honest, it hadn't changed a lot. We still, in the church, we give off this idea of, hey, stop it. We don't want you to have fun. Matter of fact, Irma Bomback wrote about this years ago. When she wrote about that, one day she was sitting in church and a small child turned around and began to smile at the people behind her. And when the mother noticed this, the mother whispered to her daughter, "Stop that grinning, you're in church." And then she smacked her on the bottom a little bit, and as the child turned around and kind of, really sullen, sat down back in the pew, the mother said, "That's better." And Bombeck concluded that some people come to church, she said, looking like they have just read the will of their rich aunt, only to learn that she left everything to her pet hamster. Sometimes I look at us and I go, why, if we look this bad, why would anybody be attracted to Jesus? I mean, come on. You've been to some funerals that were more exciting than some church services, right? We've got this messed up in our brain. See, the issue that we're really talking about is not the action, but it's the relationship between the old covenant, the law of Moses, and the new covenant, the gospel of Jesus Christ. John the Baptist's disciples could not understand this. The Pharisees, they could not understand this. They didn't understand how joy could be a part of religious life. And so Jesus, he's trying to help them along. And so he gives them a relational answer to help them understand. Look in verse 34. Jesus said to them, "You can't make the wedding guests fast while the groom is with them, can you? But the time will come when the groom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days." To help us kind of understand what Jesus is saying here, we've got to understand some about the Jewish custom of the time. A newly married couple did not leave like today. You get married, you leave and go on a honeymoon. Isn't that one of the first questions? Where are you going on your honeymoon? And as soon as the service is over, as soon as dinner's over, as soon as the dancing's over, whatever it may be, they take off and they go someplace on a honeymoon. But that wasn't the case back then. The case back then was, now we got to remember also the groom, the engagement has been going on for at least a year. And during this time, he has been building a house, adding on to mom and dad's house. That was very common. You'd have the main house, and then all the kids would build houses either on the property or attach it to the house. And so this is his job for a year, is to build a place for he and his wife, soon-to-be wife, to live. So as part of the celebration of the wedding, for the week after the marriage, they have open house. And they're hosting, all these people are coming to their house, and they are having a week-long celebration. Yeah, I mean, think about some of these weddings, the party's over in, 2 or 3 hours. They went for a whole week. Hudsons don't want to hear about that. This party lasted for a whole week, and people are coming and going. And one of the things that became their tradition was that during this week of celebration, nobody had to fast. The bride and the groom didn't have to fast. The family, they didn't have to fast. The guests that are coming, that are being a part of this, they didn't have to fast. The rabbinical ruling said it like this: and all in attendance on the bridegroom are relieved of all religious observances, which would lessen their joy. So what Jesus is saying, his assertion here, is that his presence justified a feast, and that all of his followers had the joyous privilege of this perpetual wedding. This glorious circumstance. As a matter of fact, it would even be wrong to mourn during this time. I believe that Jesus was a joyous person for at least 3 reasons. At least 3 reasons. Number one, Jesus' love. And people felt his love. Jesus cared about the people around him, and specifically his disciples and his followers felt it. They knew it. And his presence evoked a sense of security and well-being. When you feel true love, you can't help but have joy in your life. Number 2, Jesus is holy. To be in the presence of perfect holiness makes you aware of your sin, yes. But it also, when we're in the presence of Jesus, it offers us forgiveness. When we are forgiven, we experience joy. And number 3, Jesus' power. The lepers were completely cleansed at his word. The stormy sea calms at his word. Jesus brought genuine release from guilt, liberation from bondage. And as they followed him, his followers each day would experience hope. They found life to be a continual feast of joy in the presence of Jesus. Now, Jesus did acknowledge there's going to be a time, there's going to be a time when fasting is going to be necessary. It's going to be expected. But Jesus said, until then, we're going to celebrate joy. We're going to celebrate. And so Jesus then moves. He just continues. I've got to get you people to understand this. And so he moved to some parables to drive his point home. Look in verse 36. He also told them a parable. No one tears a patch from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, not only will he tear the new, but also the piece from the new garment will not match the old. So our lesson here is that the gospel of the new covenant is simply too dynamic for the old covenant structures. See, Judaism, it started good, but then it became a burden. And I want to suggest that if we're not careful, Christianity began good, but over time it can become a burden. With the weight of rules and regulations, Judaism had become an old, worn-out garment. It couldn't be patched. It wasn't enough for them to be able just to fix one little area. So Jesus came to bring freedom from all the rules and all the regulations, to do away, to exchange a religion for a relationship. And then Jesus said, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins. It will spill out, and the skins will be ruined. No new wine is put into fresh wineskins. Our lesson here is that Jesus produces an expanding joy in the hearts of his followers. Now, let's understand this a little bit. Very often back then, they would use goat skins to hold wine. And the reason for that, the goat skins had they were strong, but they also were very elastic. And so when they would put the wine into the goat skins, the fermentation would cause them to start expanding. And the goat skins were good about expanding without breaking. But after they had done their expansion, they kind of got set in their ways. And so then the next time, if you put wine into an old skin, it would more than likely rupture because it had expanded all it was going to do. It had gotten set, and it wasn't going to change. And Jesus comes along and he says, if you put the new wine into the old wineskins, they're going to be brittle, they're going to be inflexible, and it's going to cause them to burst, and you're going to ruin a decent skin for holding liquid, and you're going to waste the new wine. Both would be lost forever. See, when Jesus comes into our lives, he begins to expand. Now, we have to let him, but he begins to expand. And if we will allow him, he will expand us beyond our own imagination. Once Jesus takes up residence in our lives, every aspect of our being, from our intellect to our emotions to our will undergo a change. A new dynamic infuses us so that our old structures will no longer contain it. But many people, they're not interested in any of this. Unfortunately, a lot of people that call themselves Christians aren't even interested in this. They want the benefits of Jesus Christ without having to change. I don't know why. It's kind of one of those jokes within the church. but it's a joke because there's some truth to it. You know what I'm talking about? The old crabby Christian? Why is it that a person that has been a Christian for 30, 40, 50 plus years seems to be the one that is the most intolerant of anybody, when they should be the one that is completely expanded with Jesus' love? There's a lot of people that call themselves Christians that aren't interested in being filled with Jesus. And Jesus explains this with I'm just going to call it an interesting proverb, okay? Verse 39. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants new, because he says, the old is better. So our lesson here is that many will refuse the new for the old. Many people who have not tasted the new are determined to never try it, because they imagine that what they have is better, and there's nothing newer that can be any better than that. And therefore, they will not even try it for a comparison's sake. Now, we may go, well, that just sounds weird. But is it? I mean, maybe you can identify with this in your life, but I think most parents that have had young children, we can identify with this. Children often lock into one type of food that they like, and they don't want anything else. Anybody experience that? It might be peanut butter and jelly. It might be mac and cheese. It might be chicken nuggets. But there's one specific or two specific foods, and it's like, as a parent, it's like, come on, there's more food out there. I know I tried to trick you with broccoli one time, but no more, okay? I mean, I will, and I do eat chicken nuggets. Okay, I'm just telling you. Sometimes chicken nuggets is a good piece of chicken nugget, right? But there are a lot better ways to cook chicken out there, right? There is. I'm not talking bad about the chicken nugget, but I'm also saying if it's fried up just right, right? But if we never try, and unfortunately, I see Christians like this all the time. I'm not going to try anything new. I'm not going to. I like what I like. I know what I like, and I don't care if something else is better. I'm going to stick with what I know. I'm not saying that's always wrong. Please don't hear that. What I am saying is that sometimes when God calls us to something new, we need to be willing to let Him expand in our lives, because we might find something I had no idea. If you put Cajun seasoning on broccoli, you could tolerate it. We have to be willing to exchange the old for the new, or exchange in for the new. I've only got one application for us today, and that is those that Jesus lives in become temples. I want us to remember the temple, the Old Testament temple. It represented the presence of God. The Holy of Holies represented the place where God would meet the people. And the whole temple, with its sacrificial system, it provided the means for being with God, for God to be able to bring people into a relationship with Him. But as we are continuing this story, we're going to see that one thing is very clear, and that's that Jesus is the new temple. that Jesus is where we meet God. Jesus is the only way to have a relationship with God. John described it like this in his gospel. He said, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We observed His glory, the glory of the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." This word that we have translated here as dwelt. In the Greek, it means to take up residence, to move in, to live in. This kind of makes sense. If you dwell in your house, that's where you live. When we accept Jesus as Savior, He moves into our life. And if He is the new temple and now He is in us, guess what that makes us? A temple. It makes us a temple. It makes us the place that where we come into a relationship with God, where we can meet God, where we can live with God. It ought to change the way that we think about how we live life. So often we compartmentalize our lives. I understand this. We live one way at home, and we live another way at work, and we live another way at school, and we live another way at the ball field, and we live another way at church. I don't know who came up with the analogy, but I love it. They call it, it's like, it's a waffle life. You know how waffles, they've got the little bitty compartments? I don't know about you, but I like dripping syrup into each of the compartments, right? Yeah. There's just something satisfying about that. But if you're sharing a waffle with somebody that doesn't like syrup, you know what you can do? You can cut a section off, and syrup never even gets to their waffle. But have you ever tried that with pancakes? When you pour syrup over pancakes, what does it do? It just oozes all over the pancakes. Yes, I'm getting hungry too. But then if somebody wants to share pancakes, they've got to eat the syrup. We can't compartmentalize our lives. I almost said it right. When Jesus moves in, He is there. And we don't live one way at church and another way at home. We live the same because we've become temple of Jesus Christ. And let me tie all this back together. When we live life that way, it brings us joy. Living with Jesus, living for Jesus, allowing Jesus to live through us ought to make Christians the happiest people on the planet. And I am not saying we're never going to be sad. I'm not saying that there's never going to be something that's happened that's going to cause us to be sorrowful or to cause us issues. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying even through those things, we have a joy in Jesus Christ. Let's not be the people that can't understand that. Let's be the people that want that and that join in with that on a daily basis. In just a moment, we're going to sing a song, and as we are, it's our opportunity to reflect and respond. What has God said to you today? What's He expecting of you? What does He want you to do? What does He want you to change? Would you be willing to do so for Him? If you've never accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, I'll be here at the front. I'd love to talk with you about that. Will you stand with me as I pray?